Days have become weeks, and weeks are now turning into months that we've been in this state of lockdown, where we've isolated ourselves from our friends and our family to stay safe from this virus. And if you're like me, you might be getting a little stir-crazy from being at home so much. Maybe you're longing to see your friends and family again, to sit down and share a meal with them, to hug them, to be with them at a distance closer than 6 feet. And that same longing, that same looking forward to, is very similar to what Christ is wanting us to feel for Him when He returns. Jesus shares this parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. He says this. He says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, 'Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him.' Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise answered, saying, 'Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves.' And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward the other virgins came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he answered, 'Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.'" And that's true. We don't know when Christ will return again. In fact, Christians have been waiting centuries and generations for Christ's return. But Paul was anticipating Christ's return even in his lifetime. And he shares with us these words of encouragement of how to help us overcome this long waiting period for Christ's return. And he shares these in Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. He says, "If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are of earth." And those words, they encourage us not to become mired in the life that we live here on earth, not to seek wealth, not to go after the passions of this life, but to look to heaven, to imagine, to envision what it will be like to spend eternity with Christ. You know, there was a moment several years ago where I got to go to a wedding of some friends of mine that served at a church where I worshiped in college. And I had moved on and hadn't seen any of these people in many years. But going to this wedding and getting to be at the celebration afterwards, the wedding feast, it was like a family reunion, getting to see friends and catching up with them that I hadn't seen in many, many years. And it gave me a glimpse into what that marriage feast that Jesus talked about in that parable might be like, where we get to celebrate with friends who have gone on before us and are now spending eternity with Christ. But it's going to be so much better than that, because it's not going to be just about catching up with old friends, but it's going to be spending eternity with Jesus Christ Himself, the one who loves us so much that He would give Himself for us, even though we are so dirty and in need of His love and His mercy. And that is just a glimpse of what I think that marriage feast will be like. So maybe it's getting visions of that, one way to focus on the things that are above. But I think Jesus also gives us a picture of what it looks like not to be mired in the things of this life when He shares these words of encouragement in Matthew chapter 6. I would encourage you to read the whole passage starting in verse 25, but He talks about how we shouldn't be anxious about life, but rather that God will provide for us. That He says, look at the birds in creation. Do they sow? Do they plant? No, they don't, but God still takes care of them. And he says that we are much more valuable even than them. And he shares this in verse 33 of Matthew 6. He says, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you. Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious about itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." And those words that Jesus shares encourage us that God will take care of us even in the midst of the season of life that we find ourselves in right now. But I think there's one other thing that we can do to help combat and to be ready for Christ's return. And it's this. It's that we should focus on bringing someone along with us to the marriage feast. You know, we went through this One Life series last year that was so powerful and so challenging for us to get to know someone that doesn't yet know Christ and to simply just build a relationship with them. So perhaps today might be a good time for you to catch up with your One Life if you haven't thought about them in a while. To help build that relationship, to develop friendships, to discover their story, and then to determine the next step that God might have for them in their life and in getting to know Him. We would love to hear about how your One Life story is going. And we would love to hear how we can be praying for you in the midst of this difficult season that we find ourselves in. So you can go to our Facebook page and share that. And you can also go to our Care and Prayer Facebook page to share any prayer requests that we can be lifting up for you this week.